Welcome to the Butcher Block Horror Podcast, where we exhume horror movies from the past and cut into what makes them so delectable. I'm Kane.
I'm JD.
And I am Joe.
And today we're going to be throwing Deranged onto the slab and carving up our favorite portions to force feed to you, our unwitting victims.
Delicious.
If you enjoy the taste of these feasts of fright, then give us a like and subscribe, being sure to click on the bell. Consider following us on Twitter and Instagram, and I think we have a Facebook page now too.
We do.
And very important, we have the website that you can find us at, and another awesome podcast, Brainworms, is WeGiveYouBrainworms.com.
The link to the Patreon is there as well.
It is. So,
Yes.
Deranged. That was
Deranged.
It was a time.
It was definitely a time. The old guy from Home Alone is Ezra Cobb, and he's kind of the 1974 Canadian version of Ed Gein. Is that how we should describe this?
Yeah, it's essentially what it is. And to be clear, it's Deranged, and there's a subtitle, Confessions of a Necrophile.
I would like to say he never actually fucks any of the corpses.
So, okay, I researched that, and if one is a necrophile, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have sex with corpses. It just indicates that there is a strong fascination with the dead and death.
Oh.
Fair enough.
It bummered me out.
Yeah.
Did you just want to see that guy bone a stiff? Is that?
I did. I wanted to see him crack open a cold one.
Nice.
Bone to bone.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. So yeah, this movie was released in Los Angeles, March 20th, 1974.
Which, after watching it and just thinking about, the 70s, that had to be weird in theaters.
Pretty weird. But Kane, I believe earlier you were informing me on the release date. Wasn't it released and then...
Apparently it disappeared after its release in 1974.
Okay.
Probably some fucking do-gooder Morality Squad dickface got a hold of it, was like, no one should see this drivel.
Right.
And it was later rediscovered in Florida in the mid-1990s.
So what I wonder is if between the time that it was released and the time that it reappeared, was that edited? Because I believe there were about 20 minutes or so cut from this film. There was a screen time of 84 minutes, but in order to get any type of rating at all, this movie had to have scenes removed, probably because it was 1974 and, a bit risque for that time. So,
and that fucking kills me, because you have movies like Salo, 120 Days of Sodom, and that movie was rated fucking PG-13. And trust me, no fucking 13-year-old should probably watch that.
Really, no one should watch that.
No one should, honestly. It is part of the Criterion collection. So, I think there's some value to it because of that. But there's a scene where a girl has to eat her own shit with a spoon, and that's just not PG-13. So rating systems are arbitrary and fucking stupid, based off of, the idiots that decide, all right, well, we're going to make the rating this. Like, why? What precedent did you come to this conclusion for?
Sure.
Sorry for my little mini rant there. I just fucking, the Motion Pictures Association or whatever, whoever does the rating
MPAA.
system.
Well, right.
They're just a bunch of fucking assholes.
Well, I remember at the beginning of the film there was a little Metro...
MGM.
Yeah, MGM. And so, you see the little lion head, doing its thing. But I think to myself, a budget of $200,000, not a whole lot of money, but I feel like for that amount of money, they did a hell of a lot. And there's an interesting fact about that budget. Producer Tom Carr used his own personal funds that he had earned through working as a concert promoter for Led Zeppelin and Three Dog Night. How awesome is that?
It's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
It's super awesome. Like,
did the movie make his money back for him?
I hope so. I really do, because it's like a cult classic. It has a cult following.
Didn't it get lost in a vault for 20 years, though?
It did.
Right.
Yeah.
So that may have been a sunk cost.
Yeah. But DVD sales thereafter, I know it was re-released and it was on a double disc DVD thing with Motel Hell, which is another fantastic movie that I hope we'll talk about soon. Yeah, Tom Carr produced this film, and he absolutely had an intense fascination with Ed Gein. So he sort of collaborated with the director, Alan Ornsby, to go ahead and write Really, I think he did a phenomenal job. I've researched quite a bit into Ed Gein's story, and now having seen Deranged, really, I think now that I've done some research behind the movie, it's so closely overlapping that story, and in addition to that, I think he did a tremendous job writing and making something palatable for a movie screen that people could kind of get freaked out by and have some fun, around Halloween or whatever.
Sure.
No, I mean, it hasn't aged gracefully. But with that being said, it really does have some interest, especially when you think about the budget of $200,000.
Oh, yeah. It did a lot with that.
The makeup effects and stuff like that were pretty awesome.
Speaking of makeup effects, one of the most wonderful, legendary special effects / makeup artists of all time, Tom Savini, got his start on this film. I don't know if this was the jumping point for his career, but it was definitely one of his earliest special effects / makeup effect jobs. But anyway, Tom worked under Alan Ormsby, the director, as his personal assistant, and was a serious part of coming up with some of the like the prosthetic heads that were created. And I think that's amazing.
The arm nailed to a wall.
He may very well have been involved with that, because anything, everyone knows that loves horror films. They know Tom Savini and recognize him as a horror special effect icon. So any gruesome bit of this film could very well have involved him.
Nice.
Yeah, my kiddo has the 6th edition of the Tom Savini special effects makeup book. So
that's
you
cool.
got a cool kid, man. That's all I have to say to that.
I agree.
That's what cool kids have.
What is the writing staff? Is there anything about that?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about Alan Ormsby for a second, because he began his career as a writer, and he did some acting as well. But so he started his career basically writing for a film released in 1972 called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. And that was, I know, right?
That's on my list.
That's a hell of a title. That's a good title for your list. That was directed by Bob Clark. And Alan Ormsby, he was a writer for that film, and there's a bunch of different connections to this film and a couple of others throughout his career. But he directed it, but it was also co-directed with Jeff Gillian. And he was actually born in Ohio, gentlemen.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good he got out.
Well, he got out and he did some big things, because Jeff Gillian is a badass director. Born in Ohio, 1942. You know what's funny about this guy is, so he does this, grotesque, deranged film based on the life of Ed Gein, but he was also involved as an actor in the film A Christmas Story, 1983.
What?
He played Santa Claus. Yeah.
Huh.
Isn't that crazy?
Santa Claus is great, too.
Yeah, and he was a murder victim in Police Academy 5. Right? Like, what a wide scope of one's career. So those guys kind of wrote and co-directed, but a lot of the writing was done by Alan Ormsby.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah. And actually, that movie, the Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, Alan Ormsby, he played a lead role in that film, and so did his wife. They both had a big part in that, and they kind of met a lot of the other people involved with Deranged through that film.
Yeah, that film is a classic. That Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. It's so bad that it's so good.
Nice. I like movies like that.
Like, it's this long, drawn-out thing. We'll cover it at some point.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. And I like to kind of talk a little bit about the background of, directors and writers. For example, Alan Ormsby, his background includes films such as My Bodyguard. I'm not exactly sure what that is. Cat People.
Oh, no shit.
Yep, Cat People. And a movie that instantly struck a chord with me. I thought it was hilarious that he had something to do with this. But do you guys remember the Porky's franchise?
Yeah.
Sorta. I wasn't allowed to watch them.
I mean, you weren't missing much, really.
Not a whole lot of kids were allowed to watch Porky's, but yeah, he was involved with Porky's too. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's always astonishing to me that movies like Porky's get sequels.
And there's one other thing I'd like to say about Alan Ormsby that I learned. He actually wrote the original screenplay for the remake of The Mummy.
Huh. Which one?
Yeah.
So it was like the 90s.
One with Brendan Fraser?
Okay, yeah. Brendan Fraser, yeah.
But then what happened was something got messed up with that, and his screenplay went unused, and it was later rewritten by someone else. But it's interesting, it's like, what would that movie have been like if he wrote it? Mm-hmm. I wonder. I ponder that. What do you gentlemen ponder right now?
What do you mean?
What are we thinking
about? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in your
thoughts.
That's
like an awkward car ride.
Yeah. Are we there yet?
Hey, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? Do you want to talk about anything? What's going on?
Yeah. No, I mean, ultimately, I think that I want to know what was going on with the writing staff. Mm-hmm. Like, what was Bob Clark or Alan Ormsby? Was he involved in the writing process, or was he just the director? Jeff Gillian and Alan Ormsby?
Bruce Hornsby?
They co-directed it. And what's interesting is, so one resource cited the director of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things as being involved with Deranged, and yet through everything that I read, I didn't see the connection in any other way. So I wouldn't know exactly where he was involved, in what area, but I would assume writing if there was involvement.
Right.
But the writing process was initiated by Tom Carr, the producer, because like I said, he threw down a bunch of money to tell this fascinating story that he thought was fascinating. It's interesting the things that we find fascinating and glorify, like a serial killer. Like, what would drive one to want to tell that story, being that they did all of these, like, heinous, grotesque things, and yet there's a fascination there, Well,
I mean, I was fascinated that that creepy reporter guy kept showing up just randomly. Like, I know what they were doing, and I actually give him a little bit of credit. This guy's not actually there. He's in the past showing you these things.
Right. He's sort of narrating a bit.
I just felt like he was...
Between scenes.
He was just out of place in a way that was jarring.
Just showed up to tell the audience things every now and then.
Yeah.
It was disturbing.
Like the scene where
he wasn't there to, like, trying to help. You know what I mean? Like, you almost wish that he would jump in instead of allow people to be murdered.
Well, he was just telling the story.
Yeah. He couldn't intervene. That's his curse.
Yeah.
But it was hard to separate that in my mind. I'm just like, oh, damn,
because he just popped up.
Yeah, why didn't you just hit him with a frying pan or anything? Mm-hmm. A femur, anything.
Yeah. Just grab the violin. It's fine.
Yeah.
Smash
it's not
his
like
face.
He can play it.
Yeah.
It's not catgut.
Yeah, he didn't. He didn't play anything.
You didn't have a bow.
What was the name of that song that they just pretty much scored the film with over and over again?
The score. It's an old hymnal called "The Old Rugged Cross,"
and it was played on, like, what kind of, was that, like some type of old, like a pipe organ or something? Like, what was that?
That sounded like a recording from a pipe organ.
Yeah.
Or like a church organ, yeah.
Like a Hammond? Is that what those are called? No.
Yeah, I don't think that's what that was.
No. That was definitely a pipe organ.
Yeah.
Okay, a church pipe organ. Okay.
Yeah,
that was just that sound being kind of, it was like, it felt misplaced along with, what you're seeing. And it really added to the discomfort of the film. It was really uncomfortable to hear that and to see the things we saw. I
appreciated it ultimately because The Old Rugged Cross was my father and my grandfather's favorite hymnal. So it just seemed amusing to me that song was going to play while a guy tries to force someone to marry him and then is gutting a young woman, a dead woman, like she's a fucking deer.
It worked for me for a while, and then the movie kept doing it, and I kind of just got tired of hearing it past a certain point.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the Super Mario Brothers music. It's like you can only hear that song so many times before you're ready to just fucking murder people.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't supposed to be part of the soundtrack. Maybe that's just always playing.
Yeah, it was driving him to murder.
It was just always playing in his house. And after a while, he was finally like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to go kill people. I was playing with their dead bodies, but, this song, I'm fucking tired of it. And I'm going to show my displeasure by murdering people.
Yeah.
Right. That would work. And I think it did. So I gotta say that Ezra Cobb, he was played by a very interesting actor by the name of Roberts Blossom.
Also known as Lips McGee.
Was he known as Lips McGee?
No.
Oh, you got me there because he was very pouty. He had that very like pouty lip thing.
Yeah.
that gentleman was a Harvard graduate, and he also worked as a poet near the end of his life. He was a bit of a poet, and he also was best known for the role of Old Man Marley in Home Alone. And that seems to be, so to think of the role of Ezra Cobb, that's just like the perfect role for this guy. Watch the movie. I'm encouraging our listeners to watch Deranged, aka Confessions of a Necrophile. I'm encouraging you to watch this and just tell me that there was a better actor to do what Roberts Blossom did, because I think he was perfect as portraying Ed Gein.
His expressions were really good all through the movie.
Yep.
Yeah, extremely expressive and just awkward and creepy and everything that I would imagine Ed Gein to be. You know, Ed Gein's story is gruesome. You know, he's this murderous wretch in the late 1950s in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He's got all these actually pretty cool nicknames. The Butcher of Plainfield, the Plainfield Ghoul. I mean, it would be kind of cool if somebody referred to you as like the ghoul of wherever you're from.
I wouldn't want to have to earn that title, though.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you were just given that title, like a nickname, like that's a pretty sweet nickname, like to be the...
Yeah, but I mean, wait, there's only a couple of ways to get that nickname.
I understand.
One, you give it to yourself. You give it to yourself like an asshole. Or...
Yeah, that's true.
Or you dig up people, possibly eat them, and, you know, turn their nipples into a belt.
That's an incredible thing to repurpose nipples for. I almost feel like nipples should be like repurposed. Like imagine them like as like the lenses of some strange glasses. I imagine that more easily than a belt.
I mean, you wouldn't be able to see through them.
Yeah, but that's the thing, you know, like all kinds of glasses have been made that weren't necessarily meant to be seen through. Right away, I think of there are like these glasses with like really intense lines through them, and they're meant to be like x-ray glasses. I don't know if you guys have ever been in like an old trick store and seen a pair, but I always thought, like, how the hell are you supposed to see anything through those?
I don't know, but he made a window shade drawstring out of lips.
Yeah, he did all sorts of things, and so really they're just looking at Ed Gein's story. You know, Tom Carr's fascination with him kind of led to that. So they looked into exactly what Ed Gein did. And really, the only way that this story really deviates much from Ed Gein's story, the one detail that is not true to Ed Gein's story is that he did not exhume his mother. He did not disrupt her grave. However, he did disrupt the graves of 40 people. And, you know, it's rare to refer to someone as a serial killer with that few of murders, but Ed Gein murdered 2 people. That's typically not, you know, how you would describe a serial killer necessarily, but it was just all of these other gruesome acts. And he also educated himself a lot on taxidermy. Ed Gein was an avid reader of like these really strange books on, taxidermy. And he also read some books on like these strange like Nazi experiments. I guess they were doing like horrible, horrible things to people that was written about in some way, but Gein like gravitated to all that literature and kind of tried to apply things from experiments and things that he read about taxidermy and kind of did a bunch of gruesome shit and mutilated a bunch of corpses. So
God, it's just gross.
Yeah.
So aside from Robert Blossoms, do we know anything about any of the other actors?
Yeah. An actor in the film was Cosette Lee, and she starred as Amanda Cobb. Now, I happened to learn that they chose the last name Cobb so they could refer to Ezra's mother as Ma Cobb, and it was sort of like intended to be a little play on words like macabre.
Oh, yeah.
And Cosette was born 1910 in Toronto, Canada. Yeah, she was just intended to portray Gein's mother, whose name was Augusta Cobb. I'm sorry, Augusta Gein. It just sort of...
You're just stuck on that Ma Cobb joke that you told her.
Ma Cobb.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, hey, that was their joke, not mine. I'm just repeating history.
Right.
So she was a Canadian actress born in 1910. So this is going back a ways. And I thought this was interesting, but her career included stage acting, television, and it goes as far back as radio, like when stories were all acted out over the air. And
right.
That's a whole different era, very different. And then she also obviously made her way into film acting. So, and then there was Leslie Carlson. That was Tom Sims in the film. He was born in Mitchell, South Dakota in 1933. And I believe that was Ezra Cobb's next door neighbor, the guy who was like oogling over the gun in that little convenience store.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that guy was weird.
Very strange.
Yeah, that guy was real weird.
But I think, he was casted well. I think he was, trying to be like that good old American boy with his, truck driving, gun loving, sort of thing. But yeah, so Les Carlson. Yeah, and he was known for Deranged. And he was also in another pretty cool horror film called Black Christmas.
Oh, nice.
Yep. And he also made some television appearances in The Twilight Zone and The X-Files. So
I was a big fan of The X-Files in the 90s.
Yeah, me too. Until the 5th season.
And then shit
I
just gets
tried
weird.
whistling.
Like too weird.
Do you ever try whistling with a mask on? I tried whistling the theme of the X-Files at work the other day, and I could barely whistle because of the mask. For some reason, it made it really difficult.
That makes sense.
There's just not enough room to pierce
sense.
your lips and manipulate the air. So, but I was disappointed, to say the least.
Where was John Wayne Gacy from?
Illinois. He's an Illinois boy.
Yeah, but I mean,
what suburb? It might have been Plainfield, honestly. There's a Plainfield, Illinois. There's a Plainfield, Wisconsin. So I'm not too familiar with John Wayne Gacy other than I know he's a fucking cretin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was an awful dude.
Clearly. I noticed something when I was kind of looking through the cast and the cinematography and music, and the art direction was led by a person named Albert Fisher.
Al Fish?
Albert Fisher. So I right away, I'm thinking, a movie about a serial killer based off of Ed Gein. Art direction was led by Albert Fisher. I thought that was kind of funny.
It's a weird coincidence.
Yeah. So he worked on a film, kind of what I was trying to lead up to earlier with mentioning the movie that Alan Ornsby and a few other people kind of met on and then followed through and collaborated with. Albert Fisher, he also worked on a movie that Ornsby worked on, and I also believe Gillen worked on it as well, but there was a movie called Death Dream.
Okay.
And I want to say that was released before Deranged, maybe in 72 or 73, somewhere around there.
Makes sense.
But Albert Fisher, he did a lot of the set design. So any of the rooms that we were observed in Deranged, that was all Albert Fisher.
Oh, with all the magazines scattered around and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sort of just dressing the room with just a bunch of strange little details that made you feel
that's pretty cool.
He made an excellent, uncomfortable environment.
Yeah, I mean that house was gross.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it just looked like it was kind of trashed, almost as if they were squatting there, but they actually live there. I think once Ma Cobb died, that's when things took a turn for the worst, and leaving Ezra all by himself to spiral down his twisted whatever you'd call his psychosis, that definitely led to some untidy housekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta ask, because this just popped up into my head. So the split pea soup from the beginning, right? He's actually got, the coffee cup actually had mother written on it so that they didn't get their coffee cups confused. I'm just assuming that Robert's Blossom just smelled terrible and was just gross the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the reason that they created the cup with mother on it, so that no one had to actually
no lips
drink from the same cup.
Yeah, you don't want your lips touching a cup that his lips touched.
But do you think the art director put together that pea soup? Yeah, because mom starts
my gut feeling
vomiting up blood.
My gut feeling tells me that had more to do with Alan Ornsby, actually, because so Alan Ornsby, he had a lot of, like special effect experience.
I just, the art direction of the film, like maybe Tom Savini was involved and Alan Ornsby were involved with like the makeup and special effects.
Yeah.
But then that probably means that the guy that did the art direction, he probably stuck that arm on the wall.
So,
I mean, it stands out to me.
Yeah.
It stands out to me. The arm stuck to the wall really stood out to me because, the skull bowl was pretty good. And, the human skin drum, that was pretty good too, with the femur drumstick. But then there was just the fucking arm just hammered to the wall.
Yeah.
And that really sticks out to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, Geen was a big fan of taxidermy and kind of like repurposing body parts into sometimes furniture, sometimes lampshades, clearly drum skins, and...
He didn't like to waste.
No, he was all about, just using every bit of the human. So, okay, I just came across in my notes the part about Ornsby that I thought was pretty cool. He wrote a book in the 1970s about special effects and movie makeup called Movie Monsters.
Oh, cool.
So, if any of our listeners have a copy of Movie Monsters, awesome.
Yeah, no, that's definitely cool.
Yeah, I might check that out.
Yeah, I'd be interested in flipping through that. I'll bet there's some amazing stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that was led to, I would imagine, Tom Savini doing some cool stuff.
So who is the reporter?
The narrator dude?
Yeah.
Leslie Carlson, he actually was the narrator / reporter.
You mean / time-traveling heathen that could only watch and not do anything?
He could not intervene on any of the unfortunate events that occurred by the hand of Ezra Cobb.
Just the fact that he shows up, like he's there before mom dies. Mm-hmm. Like he could have nipped that in the bud.
Oh yeah.
He could have killed Ezra right after mom died and it would be over. There'd be no murders, no fucking corpse cleanup at that dude's house.
Right. Even the story of Ed Gein would have disappeared. He would have all the bodies would have floated back into the graves and no such trauma.
Exactly. So what all did Les Carlson, what was he involved in? Aside from Deranged?
He was mostly known for Deranged, another horror film called Black Christmas. And he was also
awesome.
in...
That's a fucking great movie.
Yeah, right? And he was just involved in a lot of cool shit. And then also the television shows Twilight Zone and X-Files.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so you named the actor and actress
Robert Warner.
Okay,
and Marcia Diamond.
They played the neighbors, the husband and wife, the Kuntz, and their son was
Brian Schmiegel.
Excellent. Yeah, he played a really good, just a dopey teenager that kind of followed his dad's lead. And I'm surprised by that scene in the forest while his girlfriend was screaming his name and, stepping into a well-placed bear trap. And neither Mr. Kuntz or his son heard her desperate cries.
It's true.
Yeah. That was
Although
troublesome.
He is the only one who seemed to know that Ezra was creepy.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have to give
him
all the
other people that had interacted, like when they're back at the hardware store and he's like, Dad, you got to check this out. And then the cop's like, well, you two were the last ones here. And they're like, no, Ezra was here too. But Ezra wouldn't do something like that. And the kid's like, oh, fucking yes, he would.
Right.
That guy's a weirdo.
Yeah, he felt his vibes, man. He was like that bad energy, just kind of spewing out of him.
I feel like we should definitely, and I kind of dread having this conversation, but it's unfortunately necessary.
Mm.
We need to talk about Miss Johnson and her
We really do
need to talk about her and her seance.
We can just not talk about that scene.
That conversation is going to happen right now because it's necessary for us to discuss this, mostly so that I can process it.
Sure.
Because I still haven't processed it.
So this is just group therapy at this point?
Essentially.
Okay. I could use it because I noticed and I'm serious about this. I need the therapy after her imposing dating style. She started orgasm first.
Yeah.
She's orgasm forward. She was like,
no. Let's not fast. We're giving some spoilers away to any listeners, but you know what? Just deal with it. Yeah. You know, it's just something I need to talk. So the Cootses are like, hey, you need to get a woman, and he's like, no, my mama said women are bad, and you know, Jenny Coots is like, no, dude, you're an older guy. You know, you're getting older. You're a fucking weirdo, and we don't want to hang out with you because you're. She doesn't say. We want to inflict but it was in her eyes.
Upon someone else.
We want to inflict you upon someone else.
Yeah.
And because of the fact his mommy told him that ladies were bad, he's like, "No, I don't hang out with the ladies." And then he's like, he has this eureka moment. And he's like, "Well, I mean, I guess I could look into Miss Johnson because she's fat."
That was his rationale.
That was his rationale. So so he entered into this arrangement as a shitbag, right? Just to start this off. But he shows up there, and we discovered that Miss Johnson was friends with his mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And her husband had passed away. And through the course of them kind of hanging out like super awkwardly.
Herbert.
Yeah, her husband Herbert.
With his triumphant mustache.
It was definitely, it was a...
When they showed his picture, I heard mustache. Like 12 different horns played in different keys. It was like bad road.
Right. But, you know, at first she kind of plays the role of the just lonely widow. And she's just like wants to hang out with him because she's a lonely widow. And then, you know, he kind of slips up. If you don't realize through this movie that Ezra's kind of an idiot, like he's a simple like guy, but he's just an idiot.
He's a rube, as Hannibal Lecter would
he's
say
definitely yeah. He's absolutely a rube. Proof that not all serial killers are geniuses.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he meets up at her place.
Not all serial killers.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. All right, so he meets up and she plays this role off like she's just this lonely older lady. And then he talks about his mom talking to him. And she's like, are you making fun of me? And he's like, no. And she just immediately starts bullshitting him. And she's like, oh, I talk to my husband all the time. We should get all of us together. And then it cuts to this like fucking seance scene.
Let me cut you off. Basically the scam that psychics and occultists would pull in the Victorian era to get money. Like, oh, I am Madam Sphinctertron. I can speak to your dead ancestors. Like that scam. She did that to get action.
The D.
Yeah.
To get the D.
Yeah.
Like she won
keep
the
your
D
bankroll
and the way she
in your pocket. Give me that D.
Yeah. The only bulge I want.
And I mean, and when it switches to the seance thing, like, make me understand why she had to put the blonde wig on and the makeup.
She was trying to like go up the scale of like how fuckable she would become to Ezra Cobb.
Maybe she was trying to entice him.
Like show that she could show different sides of herself. And in a very short period of time, she's
boy,
like,
howdy, she did.
Yeah.
She really showed all of her sides, including her O-face.
Without spilling all the beans, listeners, because we do want you to take a chance and watch this
movie. Especially that scene.
Watch this movie.
And
no, you need to watch this movie.
I like the poster in the background. It was like this weird abstract, like Zodiac calendar sort of thing where...
Yeah, like they were really trying to do a hard sell on her psychic abilities.
She was occult as fuck. She was like, let's do a seance. We'll fucking... And then I want you to bang me.
Yeah. Hard.
Yep.
While I impersonate my dead husband.
Oh, well, I like her. I like what you did there. I like what you did there.
No, I mean the feathers. Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
slow on the
Yeah,
uptake.
bang.
It's okay. Yeah.
I really have to, and I said it when we were watching the movie. What was the writer's intention for that scene? Was it meant to be funny? Or were we meant to be made uncomfortable? Like, what
I think it was
was
uncomfortable.
the audience expected to? Yeah, but it almost felt goofy.
Right.
It
Right.
did. It felt really hokey
Yeah.
compared to like the other scenes that were in the movie.
But so, okay, like, by that logic, were bell bottoms meant to be funny?
What?
Wait, what?
I'm asking you if bell bottoms were meant to be funny, because
I don't.
I don't-
That's a
I mean,
weird
I
correlation
think
here.
I've deconstructed what you're
do you
trying
see
to
what I'm
say.
saying, though? It's
Like maybe it was just something that if you were of the time, then you'd be like, "Oh, okay, this
right.
this
Things
makes sense
make
to me."
sense to you
Okay.
that don't
Yeah,
make
that
sense
makes
to
sense.
us now. Like, we would
But
have to be,
watching it 50
you know,
years later,
right.
yeah,
Let's move on from Miss Johnson.
Never.
You know? Yeah. See, you first you don't want to talk about it. Now you don't want to stop.
I
talking
just like
about
to
it.
be a contrarian. I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
The cinematography in that film I thought was strong. That was by cinematographer Jack McGowan.
So guess what, guys?
Chicken butt.
We're all in a fucking weird place today. So,
Yeah. What did you do?
so Miss Johnson. All right, I just figured this out in my old brain meat here.
Mm.
Miss Johnson was a corpse. It was Maureen Selby.
God damn it.
So,
That's fine.
yeah. So Arlene Gillen was Miss Johnson, a corpse, and Marion Waldman was Maureen Selby.
I think Miss Johnson got the top of her skull cut off and was turned into the fucking bread bowl. I'm pretty sure that's who. Yeah.
She did.
Okay.
That was her
Miss
role
Johnson,
in the movie.
bread
But-
bowl. Noted.
So again, it doesn't change the fact that you absolutely need to see the scene with Maureen Selby
Mhm.
as the psychic that is luring Ezra to.
I mean, you can
sin.
fast forward past that scene.
Sure.
It's fine.
So what about the sheriff? All right, so that's Robert McKeady.
Oh, Robert McKeady.
He felt like a proto Joe John Baker a little bit.
Yeah, that was what I got from him.
He knew everyone in that town. He was just, when he pulled Ezra over, he's just like, Ezra, what are you doing out here so damn late?
God damn it.
Yeah, he
So this dude, Mr. McKeady, he was known for double naked or double negative.
Oh God, I hope he wasn't known for double naked.
Not double negative.
Nobody wants to see that.
extra clothes on.
Double negative, seeing things, and deranged confessions of a necrophile.
Mm.
That's the only three things he's got in his biography.
That's his claim to fame.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad that, we went there and
Yeah.
talked about all the characters, because I surely dropped the ball this time. I feel like all the times in past movies, I gave way too much information on every single actor. And then, I kind of took your counsel more seriously over the last, I just kind of zoomed in on just a few. And now it come back to bite my tender ass cheeks.
well, I
Much
mean,
like
I think there's
Ed
a big difference. There's a big difference between the three characters that matter and the gate.
Sure. Yeah.
Or Puppet Master.
And,
Right. I guess
oh God,
we're a
Puppet
little
Master.
more tethered to the importance of these characters.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I mean, the reason I wanted to talk about the sheriff is because his first interaction with him is pulling him over after he digs up Mom, and he rubbed me the wrong
the
way.
sheriff did?
Is it
That's
because
that.
he was a law enforcement officer?
I think that
or-
might be part of it.
Yeah, because
That might
I
be part
get
of
that
it.
completely.
He definitely emphasized Ezra Cobb's white privilege by, that little slap on the wrist and just being like, okay, now go on home.
And again, another character that if he had just done the obvious thing, could have stopped the whole movie from happening.
Oh, yeah.
What about? Did we talk about Mary Ransom,
Oh.
Well, all I remember was poor Mary.
the bartender?
We didn't mention her yet, but
We haven't gotten there yet.
I will say that one of Ed Gein's two murder victims, one was named Mary Hogan, and that was the character Mary in Deranged. They shared a name, a first name.
Yeah, because that was Mickey Moore. She's from Shreveport, Louisiana,
Excellent.
I think. Yeah, that's her. Yeah. The Vindicator, Believer. She was in The Matrix in 1993.
Oh, no shit.
She entered the Matrix?
And she was in War of the Worlds.
The Tom Cruise War of the World?
Oh, that's...
Oh, and Matrix. And Matrix was a 1993 film.
Yeah, didn't...
Not The Matrix.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't that come out in 99?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I gotcha.
Different movie with a similar name.
Nice.
Yeah. She was also in The Believers and The Vindicator.
Mm-hmm.
The Vindicator.
But yeah, she got fucked over pretty bad.
Yeah.
She got hosed, I would say. And I appreciated her courage, though, for walking into the home of Ezra Cobb as he, promised her a ride home from the bar she worked at, slashes her tires, promises her a ride home. She's in the car. What the fuck are you doing, man? My turn was back there, so stop this shit box you drive, turn it around, bring me home. Instead, fucking Ezzy goes to his place and disappears inside for probably about a half hour. And she's probably got a shit or something, so she finally goes in his house. And I mean, because I just think to myself, like, what circumstances would make me go into someone's house unless I had to use the bathroom so severely and it wasn't something I could do outside? So I assumed that she had to shit, and that was the reason. She went into this. She didn't know that he was a serial killer, but so she goes in and there he is wearing someone's skin and a shawl. And, he's turning
and hair.
Yeah.
He's wearing some corpse's hair.
All sorts of shit. He's just,
Yeah.
but, waiting for someone like that. I mean, how jacked up would you need to be to be sitting there waiting for somebody in that state? Mm-hmm. You'd have to be.
He was gone.
Pumpkin.
He was pretty far gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one murder kind of set him on a journey.
Yeah, because I don't think that, I think they technically be classified as a sexual sadist since he gets sexual gratification from hurting people.
Sure.
And then our last victim.
Content warning for this episode, by the way.
Right? Yeah. Sorry. It's a fucking horror podcast.
Yeah.
Like Robert's Blossom touched any other boobies throughout his lifetime other than the actresses that I
mean, he was married twice, so
but no, I don't. Do you
Law
think
of
that
averages.
he touched his wife's boobies in those marriages?
Probably not in the same gross way that he touched fucking Mickey
in a
Moore's.
much more consensual and enjoyable context, probably.
I kind of felt like that might have been his only two shots.
You may be having difficulty separating the actor from the character.
I know. That's what it is. But it's just like it's he's the cretin at the end of the block with a shovel, or he's like. I just can't get that out of my head. It makes me feel like he's not capable of interacting with other humans in a.
And we even said while we were watching the movie, that guy looks like you'd touch him and you'd go and just wipe your hands on your shirt.
Yeah, like Bruce Willis would pass him in a movie and just stop and start shaking and have all these premonitions of all the horrible shit that he did.
Whoa.
I know I'm flipping around in different movies.
You're all over the shop, man.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's a horror movie podcast.
So
little M. Night Shyamalan.
Pat Orr was Sally Mae. She was the final victim of Ezra Cobb. Mm-hmm. And we see her breasts and then a bunch of the really well done fake blood.
Yeah, the fake blood was cool.
It popped a lot.
The movie did get a little exploitation-y.
It definitely
got
did.
Very exploitation-y.
Yeah. Definitely.
I can't say that in particular I've been fond of exploitation films just because of what they're selling.
Sure.
But that movie was not an exploitation movie.
No.
It just had elements of it.
No, I agree.
And it also showed multiple different underwear styles of the 1950s.
No, those were definitely 70s underwear. I know the movie took place in the 50s. Or supposed to take place in the 50s. Well, so
what? The wardrobe
They did not have the
up?
budget.
They didn't have the...
Well, they just did not have the budget to outfit their entire cast in 1950s undergarments.
You don't think Tom Carr could afford to buy some 1950s underwear for the ladies who were willing to be in their underwear in the film?
Unless he had a time machine.
Right.
I don't think this show had a scene.
So he couldn't just buy some off of eBay or something?
I just did a nice little type up here.
Uh-huh.
And I'm gonna link this image and I want you to take a look at it, and I want you to think about Mary Ransom's underwear, and also think of Sally Mae.
Oh yeah.
That's 1950s undergarments. So no, that was not a sneak peek at 1950s undergarments. That was a sneak
that
peek
was
at
definitely
1970s.
70s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's no straps on that thing, and those panties are insane. It looks like she's carrying a football, like
A bodice.
Yeah.
yeah. It looks like you could like wrap.
And those weird cone.
It looks like you could wrap those underwear around a football, like it would fit it perfectly. It's weird.
Yeah.
This was a weird tangent. This feels like a Brainworms episode.
It does. This feels like a weird episode.
That's okay. Weird is good.
It is.
But yeah, so I feel like we've covered everybody.
And uncovered.
And yeah, we've uncovered,
And uncovered
them too.
them.
Yeah.
Did we exhume them properly? Wah, wah, wah,
Yeah.
wah.
Well, we didn't talk about the music yet. Carl Zitter.
Yeah, we did.
Was
We-
the
He did nothing. Carl Zitter.
There was one original piece of music that was used a couple times in that
yeah,
movie.
but there were like good suspense filling moments that were like had
Were there though?
a few.
Were they
few-
though? I mean, let's not mince words here. The music for this film sucked.
Like there was a point when I said the soundtrack's just doing its own thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
This movie was relying on visual shock,
Sure.
and it did not give
Oh, no.
a shit what music was playing
Not
behind
at
it.
all.
Which, under normal circumstances, I can really get behind. Like, I enjoy when, incredibly violent action scenes in a movie
Mhm.
are accompanied by the fucking Nutcracker
Sure.
musical sound in the soundtrack behind. Like, I enjoy that kind of juxtaposition, but
Sure.
to run that exact same hymn through the entire film with a couple of string,
Like it actually would have been kind of cool if they had used like the whole soundtrack was just off-key hymns. That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they just used the one.
I mean, we did get to hear like a couple of times like really weird country songs,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
but they were very background and they did not carry on
again,
like very long.
Because I doubt this movie had the budget to license music. It was probably someone's buddy's band.
Right. Tommy and the Fiddlers.
Regardless, the music score, you didn't do much,
Yeah.
man.
Well,
I mean, we can talk about him though.
Yeah.
Like, what
What else did he do?
did you learn about him?
I didn't learn
What else did you
jack
phone in?
fucking shit about him because for that reason, pretty much.
Why? Yeah, there's no reason.
I just felt like I should
I'm
name
looking him up.
but
Well, here's the crazy thing. So he actually did fucking New Jack City and Moonstruck
What?
and Black Christmas.
Those
he did the
movies
score
did
for
have
those
real
movies.
soundtracks.
Exactly. What happened? It's a 200,000 budget, guys. That's
yeah.
This is what I
We
can
have
do.
to-
He's like, you get one song.
this is what I can do.
I'll play it
Yeah.
on the organ myself.
I've got
you get one
these-
song.
Yeah, no, I've got these public domain hymnals. Pick one.
Yeah.
Well, can't we have a couple of them? No. Pick one. You're paying me $20.
And
Pick
We
one.
can bring in a guy
it
and have
good.
him detune a cello for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And we're going to make it work.
Yeah.
Well, with that said, I guess he did all right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about our personal experience with the movie.
Mhm.
We'll go ahead and start with you, Joe, and then if there's anything that you would like to ask, that we can try to.
I don't necessarily have questions. I have a comment, though. I feel like with the budget that it had and the limitations, and clearly none of these were super, like, they went on to do other things and they, like, had done other horror movies, but these weren't, like, top tier actors.
Tell that to Robert's Blossom.
Yeah, aside from
Aside
Robert
from Robert
Blossom,
Blossom, he was legit. Yeah, I take that
Yeah.
back. I feel like with the resources that it had, this movie very easily could have become Monos: The Hands of Fate.
A blockbuster smash.
Yeah, and the fact that it was as creepy and
yeah,
suspenseful as it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, definitely had high points in the
JD?
creep factor. Speaking of creep factor, I guess the aspects of this movie that I question most, and I mentioned this earlier, is like, what really is the fuck up with our fascination of serial killers and like almost their glorification to a sense, Because to me, it's still mind-boggling that we would pay that much mind to people who are capable of doing such horrific things.
I think that it's a fascination with the act of killing someone,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that it isn't done to us makes it easier to be interested in the depraved, awful things that humans can sometimes do to each other.
Sure.
I think it's similar to why we watch horror movies to begin with.
It's like cosplaying mortality.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
That's really good,
method.
Joe. I want to.
that was an excellent way to describe it. You know, it's
cosplaying mortality. That's exactly what it is. So you're fascinated by, since you weren't a victim of theirs, it's easy to kind of maybe not glorify what they did, but to romanticize those people. When I was younger, I had a pretty deep fascination with serial killers. And as I got older, I realized, and this is why I don't really give a shit about serial killers. I'm not really interested in them and what they do anymore. I still like horror movies, but I don't really give a shit about serial killers, because primarily what they do is they target people weaker than them and manipulate those people into an easy kill. And I find those people to be disgusting. Sure. And if you are a serial killer and you're listening to us right now,
drop us a comment.
I absolutely mean that. Yeah, and I absolutely mean that.
Let us know where you're located so we can help local authorities provide them with information on your whereabouts.
I'm not going to call the police. If you're a serial killer and I know where you're at, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Right.
It's the same psychology of like, a hunter hiding in a tree with a high-powered rifle.
And a bear trap.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing glorious about serial killers.
Right.
And
there's not.
It would be awesome if we as a culture could see them for what they are, and they're just gaslighting assholes.
Well, and
that's really all they are.
Like I'm gonna kind of both sides this a little bit. I'm not gonna defend serial killers. Just for clarity, I kind of realized what I was saying. Even if you take the murder out of it, I think there's the appeal of like a mystery. Like this is what these were the clues that this person left behind, and here's how they were eventually caught.
Well, sure.
And the Zodiac killer and his codes. Even if you don't have the fascination with the murder, I think there's a certain appeal to just catching criminals and mystery, and it's a true life mystery, and that's kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, the mystery ends up getting clear. Like the Green River Killer, for example, was caught because he liked to fuck his victims after they were dead. And after they examined that and they figured it out, they found one of his kill sites. It hadn't been messed with recently. And so they fucking waited. And the way that they discovered that was fucking, what's that douchebag? He was a good looking guy. Did his own defense.
You're going to have to give me some more words.
Ted Bundy?
Carrie Elweiss played him. Ted Bundy. There we go. Ted Bundy is why they caught the Green River Killer.
Oh, no kidding.
Because he liked to revisit his kills. And he was like, hey, if you want to catch this guy and you know where, like you find one of his bodies, don't move it. Leave it where it's at. And sooner or later, he'll come back to it. So, I mean, they're not these criminal masterminds.
Sure.
A lot of their getting away with it is just dumb luck.
Right. And police incompetence.
Of course. That's always a big part of it. But yeah, so did we discuss that well enough, or did I steamroll all this?
No, I think
we haven't asked anyone, I think maybe but me, and to some extent JD. Did you finish saying what you were going to say before Kane took us on a journey?
Yeah, my apologies. Your personal experience with the movie.
Oh, well, you asked me that question and I responded by adding my personal experience is just the mystery of why we glorify serial killers, and then you went, and spoke on that a bit.
Then we went on an adventure.
I went on a journey, and I apologize.
No, you're good. I mean, I guess if I were to expound upon that at all, I would just say that I feel strongly about that topic. That it's something that I've never really understood, and it's almost kind of uncomfortable to think about. And I do love horror movies a hell of a lot, and I love this horror movie a hell of a lot. But I guess it's I don't know. I guess it's something that I've always tried to comprehend and wrap my mind around like why someone would want to be, feel fascinated by, something horrific that someone would do in that way. But I don't know. And I've drawn a bunch of portraits even of serial killers, so I guess I'm guilty of it in a sense. But I guess I don't know. It's strange. I think I've read those stories in an effort to try to understand horrific things, and like I liked your point earlier that it's a bit of a maybe we look
cosplaying,
right? Maybe we explore those things out of the fascination, not so much of what these people have done, but more so out of fascination with our own mortality and like what that could mean, and how just the fragility of life and like what it all really is.
Sure. Might be something interesting, if anybody wants to have a chat in the comments section about what attracts you to, because obviously you're a horror fan if you're listening to this. What attracts you to that kind of content?
So I suppose that I should talk about my personal experience with the movie.
Please do.
Do it.
So, obviously I enjoyed the film. I'll make jokes about it, but that's kind of how I interact with the world. But no, overall, I think it was a good film. I think I had fun watching it. A lot of times a way that a movie, even one that would be considered like a bad movie, not that I think this is a bad movie, but a lot of it leads you on a journey. And I've gotten to the point of watching so many films like this that I can tell which road they're getting ready to turn on and that kind of stuff. And I honestly feel like this movie did that too. There was obviously times where I was like, okay, I know where this is going to go. But I did not expect the ending.
They never really allow you to slip on a banana peel in this one. It's kind of like, it's very straight path.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does kind of follow the Ed Gein story, just with the names changed.
Sure.
But overall, I had a good time with it. The question that I have that I wanted to pose is, do you think that Roberts Blossom's lip should have gotten its own credit in the film?
I do.
I think it was fatigued.
Also, imagine if he had a mustache.
I don't have to imagine. I can see pictures of him.
Well, no, but just with the lip acting that he was doing. If he just had a big fuzzy caterpillar,
like negating the upper
like
lip.
Sam Elliott.
So the upper lip is fully just out of the picture, and the lower lip is framed out entirely by a fuzzy little mustache. That's what you were asking us all to imagine.
It's already happening.
Okay.
Like,
that's a
witnessing
a strange request.
Yeah.
But it's a request that our listeners should have come to expect.
But yeah, so you've gone and done it. You've sat and listened to us ramble on for however long.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how this is going to end.
It's going to be a weird one. It's going to be strange.
But it's going to be fantastic too.
But if you watch Deranged, let us know what you think.
Which you should.
Yeah, I think you should.
I concur.
I think you should watch all the films we talk about.
Every single one.
Mm-hmm. Assuming that you're not listening to this podcast as a way to watch these films by proxy because they make you uncomfortable.
You're not getting everything from it that way.
Because really just our voices are enough to make people uncomfortable, and then to
we're pretty
wash that down with a film.
But yeah, so you can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and feel free to send us a message or comment.
Don't forget the website.
I'm getting ready to say that, Joe. Okay.
Okay, say it then.
Right.
I'm trying to help.
You can also find our Butcher Block content listed at WeGiveYouBrainworms.com, where we share space with the podcast Brainworms.
I love that title.
That talks about books that are the trash heap of literature. Is that?
Yeah.
Regardless, we warn you against forgetting to like, follow, and subscribe.
Warning.
Don't
you have
not
been
do
warned.
And don't forget to ring the little bell.
Tie a string around your finger.
Yeah.
And pull out your tree.
Yeah, and stop.
Those panties are insane.